Somewhere in the ice, high in the Alps, a man lay face down for 5,300 years. Why would a Stone Age hunter want a permanent hole in his body big enough to see daylight through? And who decided he was allowed to wear it? When two hikers found him in 1991, sticking out of a melting glacier on the border between Austria and Italy, his body was almost perfectly intact. His skin, his fingernails, the food still sitting in his stomach, and his ears. Both earlobes had a hole punched clean through them, and the holes were not small. Not a delicate little pinprick for a stud. We are talking about a gap wide enough to slide a pencil through. Someone had stretched this man's ears open on purpose, thousands of years before writing, before the wheel, before the first city was ever built. And the question that hangs over him is simple and strange. Now, when you picture a pierced ear, you probably picture a teenager at a mall kiosk. A spring-loaded gun, a little gold ball, a decision made on a Saturday afternoon, and reversed by Monday if you change your mind. That is what piercing means to most of us. A trend, a phase, something faintly rebellious that your parents warned you about. So it is tempting to assume people only started poking holes in themselves recently, once we got comfortable and safe and had spare time to decorate. That assumption is wrong by a scale that is genuinely hard to hold in your head. Piercing is not a modern indulgence we invented in the age of the shopping mall. It is one of the oldest things our species does to its own body. Older than the alphabet, older than coins, older than the plow. And the frozen man in the Alps is not even close to the beginning of the story. The frozen man has a name now, Ötzi, after the Ötztal Alps where he turned up. He died around 3300 BC, roughly 5,300 years ago, somewhere in his mid-40s, with an arrowhead buried in his shoulder, though that is a different mystery for a different day. What matters here is his ears. Researchers at the South Tyrol Museum of Archaeology in Bolzano, where his body is kept in a custom cell chilled below freezing, measured those earlobe openings at somewhere between 7 and 11 millimeters across. In the language of a modern piercing studio, that is roughly a zero gauge, the kind of stretched lobe you would see today on someone who spent months slowly widening the hole a fraction at a time. Ötzi did exactly the same thing, 53 centuries ago. He is not just the oldest human we have ever found with pierced ears. He is the oldest we have found with deliberately stretched ones. And he was covered in 61 tattoos too, soot rubbed into tiny cuts, so decorating the body was clearly not some strange one-off. It was who these people were. But Ötzi's recent history compared to what a team pulled out of the dirt in southeastern Turkey. At a site called Boncuklu Tarla, a name that translates roughly to field of beads, archaeologists led by Ergül Kodaş of Mardin Artuklu University found something that pushes the whole story back more than twice as far. In a 2024 paper in the journal Antiquity, Kodaş, along with Emma Baysal and Kazım Özkan, described more than 100 small stone and copper ornaments. Over 100, with 85 of them still sitting exactly where they had come to rest, not scattered at random, but lying right beside the ears, and just below the mouths of adult skeletons. These are ear ornaments and lip plugs, and they are around 11,000 years old. Limestone, obsidian, flint, serpentine, copper. Many are at least 7 millimeters thick, which means the holes that held them were substantial. And here is the detail that turns a fashion note into something far deeper. The piercings appeared only on adults. Not a single child in that cemetery had one. Now the picture gets older still, and a little grislier, because the evidence does not always come from jewelry. Sometimes it comes from teeth. In Africa, at Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania, there is a skeleton known as Olduvai Hominid I, a young man who lived roughly 12,000 years ago. In 2020, the anthropologist John Willman and his colleagues published a study in the American Journal of Physical Anthropology, and they found a very specific pattern of wear ground into his teeth. A smoothing, a grooving on the surfaces that face inward, exactly the kind of damage you get when a hard plug worn in the lip and cheeks presses and rubs against the teeth for years. They concluded he wore 3 facial piercings. We should be honest that this kind of evidence is read rather than seen. The ornaments themselves rotted away long ago, and researchers are inferring the piercing from the scars it left on bone and enamel. But the pattern is consistent, and it points to lip plugs, what archaeologists call labrets, being invented independently in Africa, tens of thousands of years ago, with no connection to anyone else doing the same thing elsewhere. And that independence is the strange, recurring theme. Lip plugs and ear ornaments were not passed hand to hand from one clever culture to the whole world. They were invented over and over, on separate continents, by people who had never met. Which raises the obvious question, why does this same idea keep occurring to us? To answer that, you have to understand what a piercing actually is, biologically, because it explains why any of this survives at all. When you push a rod through your earlobe and leave it there, your body does not simply tolerate the wound. It reorganizes itself around the object. Skin cells creep inward from the entry point and the exit point, and over 4 to 6 weeks they meet in the middle and line the entire tunnel with a smooth sleeve of skin. That lined channel has a name, a fistula, and the remodeling of it can go on for up to 2 years, until the tissue is as sturdy and settled as any other part of you. Once it forms, the hole is no longer an injury. That is not a wound anymore. It is a permanent feature of your body, an anatomical detail as real and as lasting as a knuckle. It is why a stretched lobe never fully snaps back. It is why Ötzi's ears still showed their gauge, 5,300 years after his heart stopped in the snow. A piercing is not something you put on and take off. It is a change you make to the body itself, and the body keeps the record forever. By the time we reach the first real cities, that permanent hole in the ear had become a place to hang wealth. In the 1920s and 30s, the British archaeologist Leonard Woolley dug into the royal cemetery of in what is now southern Iraq, and pulled out some of the most spectacular jewelry the ancient world has ever handed us. Among the gold and the lapis lazuli and the carnelian were heavy crescent-shaped earrings of solid gold, dating to around 2600 to 2500 BC. Woolley knew they were earrings for a very plain human reason. They kept turning up in matched pairs, one on each side of a skull, exactly where a living person's ears would have been. In the great burial pit at dozens of attendants went into the ground wearing them. Each hoop had been hammered out of thin sheet gold and shaped over a core, light enough to hang comfortably from a living lobe, yet heavy enough in meaning to be worth carrying into the grave. These were not trinkets. In 2,000 or 3,000 years, the pierced ear had traveled from a mark on a hunter's body to a display case for a kingdom's gold. And in the Americas, piercing became something even more pointed. It became law. In Aztec Mexico, roughly 500 years ago, a lip plug worn through a hole in the lower lip was not a style choice you were free to make. It was a rank you had to earn. According to accounts recorded around the time of the Spanish conquest, only the ruler and the highest lords were permitted lip plugs, ear spools, and nose ornaments of gold and jade and turquoise. A common man wearing wood or bone might be tolerated. A common man caught wearing gold he had not earned could be put to death. Among Aztec warriors, the labret marked achievement on the battlefield, and to wear the great ear spools you first stretched your lobes wide, the very same slow-widening Ötzi had done at the other end of the world, thousands of years earlier. Your pierced face announced, before you opened your mouth, exactly who you were allowed to be. Push the thread forward into your own century, and almost nothing has changed except the vocabulary. Nose rings, which appear in the Hebrew Bible when Rebecca is given one as a betrothal gift, and which spread across the Middle East around 4,000 years ago, still carry real meaning at weddings from Rajasthan to New Jersey. And in a national survey of American adults, published by the dermatologists Ann Lauman and Amy Derrick in 2006, about 1 in 7 reported a body piercing somewhere other than the earlobe, while pierced ears themselves are so common that we have stopped counting them as piercings at all. We tell ourselves it is fashion. We tell ourselves it is a personal statement. But we are doing, with a sterilized needle and an autoclave, the exact thing a hunter did in the Alps, with a bone spike and a great deal of patience. And this is the reframe the whole story has been quietly building toward. We think of piercing as rebellion, a way to break from your parents, your school, your buttoned-up society, something you do to stand apart. But look at the actual record and it points hard in the opposite direction. The hole is permanent. The fistula never fully closes. The stretched lobe never fully returns, and you cannot simply undo it. Humans chose that, over and over, precisely because it could not be faked and could not be taken back. At Boncuklu Tarla, only adults wore them. In Aztec Mexico, only the earned could. That is not rebellion. It is the opposite of rebellion. It is a membership card written into your own flesh, proof that you belonged. Proof that you had passed through something. Proof that you were somebody, worn in a place the group could not miss, and you could never lose, lend, or lie about. So walk it back one more time. 12,000 years ago in Tanzania, a young man with lip plugs worn so long they filed grooves into his teeth. 11,000 years ago in Turkey, ornaments resting against the ears and lips of adults, and only adults. 53 centuries ago in the Alps, a hunter with his lobes stretched to a gauge you could buy today. 4,500 years ago in gold hoops in matched pairs beside the skulls of the buried. 500 years ago in Mexico, a pierced lip you could be executed for wearing without permission. The materials keep changing. Bone, stone, obsidian, gold, titanium. The impulse behind them does not change at all. Which means the next time you see a stud, a hoop, a stretched lobe, a ring through a nose or a lip, try to see it for what it truly is. Not a trend that began in your lifetime, a signal our species has been sending for at least 12,000 years. I passed through something, and here is the proof, worn where you cannot look away from it. The teenager at the mall and the frozen man in the glacier are doing the same ancient thing, making a small, permanent hole in the body and daring the world to read it. All the research is linked in the description.